Howdy all you delicious people, I'm here today to review The Crow from 2024. A big mistake is to go on and compare this movie to the very first original Crow. The only thing that I can probably compare this movie to the original Crow is just its pacing alone. Because both movies are slow films. This movie is very, very slow. Slow as molasses. But then again, that is the only thing that I can go on and compare these movies to because they are day and night films, not the same thing. And also, the formula that is to go on and be set up through Crow films is to have all these kind of hurdle characters to then eventually have the Crow character jump through to get to the final boss. So we would go on and before final boss, we'd have characters like Tintin, and we'd have all these characters that have these specific things about them. Like one character is to have singed "Hush, Little Baby, Don't You Cry," and then the Crow ends up twisting and turning that around to like, your mother's gonna give you a big black bird and pie and kills her. And we have characters who go on and they throw blades, and the Crow catches it and like, ha ha! And so the Crow ends up using this whole blade thing against his villain in that film. And so you go on and you have all these hurdle characters that have their little unique thing about them and have their very well crafted way of reversing that whole thing from the Crow. And even there are to be interesting one-liners, like in the Crow City of Angels, where we have the Crow that is to learn from the final boss. It's like, well, pain is my power. And then the Crow uses that against him by the end of the film. But like, yeah, pain is my power. And does away with him by the end of that film. Spoilers to City of Angels. I guess you'd probably figure out that the final boss ends up getting beaten in every Crow movie. It just happens that way. Wouldn't it be interesting to just kind of twist that around where the Crow can't beat the final boss in one of these films? That'd be kind of interesting. But if anything, also, I have to state here that this movie cannot go on and touch the very first original Crow movies, both The Crow and City of Angels. Those movies are just so well crafted and just so good that I would go on and tell people, if you haven't seen either one of those films, or if you haven't seen them lately, see them again. They are really good. City of Angels does have a kind of dark and grittier thing about it, and has kind of some more kind of adult themes, but anyways, check them out regardless. Because eventually we have other Crow films, like The Crow Salvation, and whatever the fourth title of the fourth Crow movie is that I couldn't be bothered to remember of it, or look it up, because I could not care less about that movie. I just could not care less. I remember it very well, because of how goofy the ideas within that movie was. But anyways, let me go on and let me state what I'm going to state here. So, Crow Salvation is the third Crow film, and I think, if anything, I am so forced to compare this Crow movie to Crow Salvation. But again, still, Crow Salvation still has that formula that the other two Crow movies follow, and is honestly just a better Crow movie compared to this one. It just is. It straight up is. But then you end up getting to that fourth Crow film, where eventually it is basically having Crow, or the Crow, save Christmas in a lot of ways. Because you have the Crow who faces off against the devil himself. Ooh, ah, ooh, yeah. And there are some other characters that are just kind of thrown in the Crow's way, like Tito Ortiz and whoever the heck else. I don't know. They're all faceless people. Even Tara Reid, I'm like, why is Tara Reid even in this film? There's not enough meat on the bones for her to really go on and rationally do anything, but she's just there regardless. But so that is to go on and force me to have like The Crow 4 and this Crow be so heavily compared, because there isn't much of any real names or any real care to the hurdle characters to get to our final boss. It's just like, oh, The Crow just does away with those characters? Okay, all right. And is there any unique way of which that he tries to kill them? Oh no, it's all kind of really just quasi similar in a lot of ways. Okay, all right, well, great, nice, fun, fun? Question mark. But eventually, we also have to realize that it's going to take a while in this movie to have us get to the black makeup. And I do like how they go on and they have the black makeup in this movie with the whole ink thing going on. And I'm trying to, as cryptically as possible, talk about this film. But I'm also going to heavily tee it up also because there's a lot of people that is to just heavily bash this film. And they're probably thinking about bashing this movie before the opening scene was to even happen. Like, probably in their minds, they were thinking of ways of like, how badly can I just go on and can I just like hate this movie? And in honesty, I would say that this movie is bad. It is. But I feel that a lot of people are going to have a different number of opinions upon this film. And some people may go on and see this movie and see it as a positive film. And then others are just going to be like, oh, it's not like the original movie. You haven't seen enough Crow. You have not seen enough of these films. I'm happy that at least it's almost in a tie with how bad the fourth Crow movie is. I can go on and at some points be like just fine that this movie exists and still say that in the same vein it's a bad movie because it spends so much time with both Eric and Shelley. But there are still some potential things about this movie that I did like. How we go on and how we have Shelley that's kind of haunting Eric in this film. Oh my god, did I like that part. I like how we get to the black makeup, the whole black blood thing. Like, I think there should have been a better setup of villains. They really didn't give a crap about that part. And then also, like, I had just gone on to watch, like, Boy versus World or Boy Kills World, another Skarsgård movie, and there was so much action in that film, and I was thinking, like, well, there probably has to be a lot of action in this movie. Not enough in my mind. Yeah, there is probably a decent amount of it, but not enough. Not nearly enough. I feel like this movie doesn't really pick up until we probably get to probably 46 minutes probably in. Maybe it might be even longer than that. But yeah, like, they take a while to get us to that real just comic book origin of the character. We have to really go on and need to know a lot about Eric and both Shelley, and we still don't know enough about these characters. I feel because how they approach this is just not good enough to me of equal stuff going on in this film. So there are some slivers of superhero stuff that I have to go on and compare this movie to, like the Legion show, the X-Men character Legion had gone on and been in a show, and that main character had gone on and been in an insane asylum and eventually went on to meet his love of his life in this asylum. And I would have to probably go on and quickly compare that to this. Not to say that it's like, oh yeah, like quality of that show equals this. No. There is also just one scene that is to be very similar to like a Deadpool car fighting scene, and that I would have to kind of throw my hat in there with comparing it to that. There is also to probably have me compare this to any just kind of healing factor character film. But I think more than likely I'd probably have to compare this movie to probably like the Vin Diesel Bloodshot movie. Where, like, though this and that kind of movie are kind of like in some ways like kind of one and the same. You have the main character just kind of facing off against faceless villains, and you go on and you have to kind of figure out where this story is eventually going to go, and be like, oh, all right. But we always knew that it's getting to the final boss. So now I have to go on and talk about that final boss and his abilities, because that's the only thing that they really set up with this character. Besides him going on and calling all these people and telling them like how like things are gonna eventually just kind of either not going well, or how he's just kind of disappointed in them, or how he's gonna go on and tell them like, well, yeah, like you're left as a pawn on the board, and you're gonna get knocked off here. And so the ability of this specific villainous character, and I get that this might be spoilers, so if you don't want to hear this, now may be the time to just kind of click away. But I'm also going to grade this movie, if I haven't kind of already. This movie is bad, but there's so much potential here. I say that there is some visually interesting things going on in this movie to tell a lot of people to give it a chance, but wait till it's in streaming. Don't run to the theater to see this film. You're going to hate me because of that. Wait till it's on streaming somewhere, and it probably won't take too long. I'm assuming that this movie is going to go and do bonkers bananas in theaters. But really, there's also not a whole lot of anything else out that may go on and just have this movie just do something, just because there's not a lot of things that are to go on and force you to rush to the theater right now, I feel. But yeah, so I would say give this movie a chance. Realize that more than likely, like, the fourth Crow movie was freaking garbage. So give this one a chance at least. Because it's equally as bad as a Crow movie that had already been made. So, now, also, you can go on and see this movie absolutely for free, but the quality of that film is not exactly all that good. There's quite a bit of scenes in the movie that are kind of out of focus, but you can see the movie regardless. You can go onto an app called Zelifonic, Zelivonic, and watch this Crow movie for absolutely free. Again, the quality is not really there, but it's the frickin' film. You can go on and judge it for yourself if you're going to go on and like, hate, just feel that it's better than nothing, because that's pretty much what we've been getting for so many years of The Crow. So, hey, it's better than freaking nothing. We could have had a Jason Momoa Crow film that was to look traditionally like The Crow. Yay, but they just didn't go in that direction. Who knows how far that Crow movie was to have been a thing before they pulled the ripcord. Not quite sure. Might have been a tax write-off, who knows. But anyways, now the special ability of this character. The special ability is that he is to go on and have people kill themselves or kill other people. And that I actually found to be quite interesting. How this person has the ability to force innocent people to go into hell was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. All right, okay. Have them kind of do the Undertaker roll the eyes back into their heads, and it's like, all right, okay. Something visually interesting there, even though quite often there is just to have me want to state, like, you didn't really have to go on and have this final boss character have this ability. You could have just straight up had just like normal human final boss character going up against the crow and go into possibly having some way to have final boss guy just be outsmarting the crow. Because logically you can't go on and again in another crow movie have the final boss guy kill the crow and then go on and either trade up power like in the Crow City of Angels movie that they did that, or go on and make the crow mortal again like any number of other kind of crow movies where they just kind of make the crow mortal and just kind of have the two final boss and the crow face off and so on and so forth, because they've done that. Like this movie has like special ability final boss against the crow and fight it out that way. So with that said, now that I've stated that, getting a little bit into spoilers, I feel like I'm going to go all the way in and want to just break down this movie and then call it a day afterwards. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to go into that song and dance and go into spoilers. So, teeing up this movie, they spend a lot of time with Shelley and Eric here, and they try as much as possible to set up how these characters are to go on and meet, and how we get to have Shelley go on and have her become a threat to the final boss is just because of a video that had been made. And so the video ends up getting made, and so Shelley now has to seek some way to get away from Final Boss and his lackeys. And so she goes on into figuring out a way to go into an area that this final boss won't get to her. And it ends up kind of being this ward or saying to sound like place. And she ends up going on and meeting Eric. But then there is just nowhere for this girl to hide. She's going to consistently be a runaway, and Eric goes on and runs away with her. But that still goes on to have the two of them just be just meant to eventually get killed. And so that has us go on to have Eric in the afterlife needing to go on and make deals with who he barely knows who this guy is. Are you some kind of angel? Are you some kind of this? Some kind of that? And we find that this character is to be Kronos, whoever that is. Not quite deep into the Crow lore of things, as far as comic book goes. But so, we have Eric need to go on and become this Crow persona and take out all of these people because he is to possibly feel that if he goes on and does all this, him and Shelley are to reunite and make their way back to Haven. But it seems that the further and further that things get harder for Eric or the Crow, arrangements are to be made, deals are to be struck, and how this eventually is to play out ends up getting into a very much like John Wick kind of big battle-ish like scene where we have the Crow facing off against all of these lackeys, these goons, and these whatever, making his way to final boss. And there is a whole big afterlife-like fight, which is kind of interesting, but then again, like it really slows down by the end. They slow it down. Like it's kind of like Power Rangers Cosmic Fury all over again. If you were to go on and watch the very tail end of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury with the whole battle between the Power Rangers and Lord Zed, they slow that thing right back down to just be like, what? Like that's how it's gonna end. But then again, like there's only one real route for us to end this Crow movie is to just do it that way because these characters are just so kind of in ways equally matched between one another. But so anyways, me still trying to be as vague as possible, but hey, let's go on and let's go full on spoiler mode in this movie because it's about that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time again to spoil this movie. I'm going to, of course, go on and whip out my phone after I pause this video to go on and whip out this cast list and go on and whip out whatever is to be noted in whatever upon this movie, as well as whatever is to be upon my brain that I can go on and remember about this tale, this movie. Just so you know, even in the cast list, there are to be just kind of faceless pictures or whatever, and so I had to go on and try to figure out how these people are to be who they are. So I think that was probably the most difficult part about this whole thing. But on that, let me go on and let me get to that. I'm going to pause this here, and I will be right back. Okay, so also there's a couple of things that I feel like I need to mention. I get that a lot of people are probably going to go on and state that the Kronos character is not something very original to the Crow because also at the very tail end of the Crow's Stairway to Heaven, there is kind of like a character like Kronos that shows up and is going on and giving the Crow like a Groundhog's Day repetitive thing over and over and over again to figure out how he can save his love, his Shelley. And goes on and tries to do it over and over and over and over again and fails every single time. And so that may go on and be like a tip of the hat to that show. And also, I think a lot of people are probably going to go on and just state that the Crow movie is just kind of a ripoff of a lot of similarities to the Joker film and can't go on and argue with that. Because really, in a lot of ways, besides the whole dancing thing with the Joker movie, it's kind of what this is in a lot of ways. But so, in the very beginning of this movie, we have this unusual dream sequence that never, I feel, gets brought up again. So we have, I would believe, to be a young Eric making his way to this horse that has barbed wire kind of around it. And we have current day older Eric just kind of asleep in this bed, just kind of tossing and turning, while young Eric in this dream sequence is going on and trying to pull this barbed wire off of this horse, while also going on and looking on at a mother that is just kind of asleep at this couch. Maybe she's a druggie, maybe she's not. She's very thin in the face. We'd have to just kind of make a number of just assumptions going on here. And so as Eric is to go on and kind of be sleeping into this dream, we go on and we turn around and we have Shelley. Shelley is going on and being told by a woman named Zadie that, like, hey, like this video, like, that we're in, like, yeah, like this is definitely gonna like paint a target on us, so like we're gonna have to go on and really be on the run here, because either one of us are gonna get captured by Vincent's men, and more than likely get killed because of this whole video. So because we're in the video, and also like this video is getting out somewhere, because we had this guy named Dorm in IMDb, and he ends up going on and meeting up with Shelley later, and he's wearing a hood, and he's kind of telling her like, hey, like shit's going down, like. And eventually Eric then meets up with this guy later on. It's like, okay, hey, like, what were you talking to her about? And so Eric is to just kind of find out more about Shelley's past, because both Eric and Shelley, like, they don't really talk much about one another's past, but if anything, they just kind of talk about how kind of similar they are in certain ways. And that whole cry now, smile later kind of tattoo thing was kind of interesting, and I can go on and see how that could have easily have gone on and helped us understand the whole makeup, or in this case ink thing, that Eric does go into, but they don't go into that. I feel that way. It could have been easy for them to have gone on into that route, but they just don't. So Zadie is to go on and tell Shelley, it's like, well, hey, like, you gotta get out of here, like, you gotta get out. So to come to find, when Zadie is to make her way to try and leave, she of course is to be captured by Marion and Lex. Lex is to be the guy with the just the one eye that is kind of a little bit more closed. Come to find out, the guy who plays Lex is a rapper, because he had a certain specific name that I legitimately had to go on and Google and figure out who he frickin' was in this film, because there is a plethora of different characters that have names, but then again, don't have faces on IMDb, so who the heck am I supposed to know who the heck anybody is? Great. Awesome. So, Zadie ends up getting captured, and so we then go on and we have Shelley, who's going on and calling Dom, and then trying to get the heck out of where she is going on and getting the heck out of. Which leads her to be followed by a guy named Wickham, Wickham. My bad. Heaven forbid I remember any of these names, any of these characters. So, Wickham is going on and following Shelley, which just has Shelley need to figure out some way of getting the cops to arrest her, as she drops her purse and has all these kind of drugs on her. And so the cops look at that and are like, oh, hey, yeah, we're going to arrest you. And Wickham just kind of turns, is like, okay, I guess I'm not going to go on and get to her now. So the following thing we end up seeing is Eric, and he's showering. And so they go to this location that is to be called Serenity Park, I believe, is this locale. So we have Eric, that it seems in this Serenity Park, no one frickin' likes him. Of course they don't. So we have a bunch of these men all kind of ganging up against Eric, and we have this therapist that is kind of at this session and really wanting to have Eric go on and kind of just chat and talk. And when it seems that he doesn't want to go on and he doesn't want to open up, it seems that the whole group is kind of punished into doing all these exercises. And this one guard, who I think in some part of the IMDb actually has a name, but heaven forbid I care to recite what that is. This guard goes on and is to be grabbing Eric and is to be so frustrated with him because, like, yeah, like, you're the reason why we're here doing all these exercises. You're the one. It's like, whatever. So Eric, for how it seems he's going on and getting in so much trouble with all of this group, he then goes on to fashion his own kind of shiv. He has this seemingly one kind of toothbrush that at the tail end of it, it is to have this razor blade, and he's kind of like testing it to see how really sharp it is, because of course it's freaking sharp. It's a razor blade. So we go on to have Eric that ends up kind of opening up his hole to his door, coming to find that there seems to be people brought in. And so Eric is going on and doing all these doodles, these drawings, and this and that. And so eventually he'll plop them all over his wall, and then Shelley later will go on and look at the drawings and be like, "Oh, was that me? Is that who you drew?" It is what it is. Uh, so instead of Eric going on and being a guitarist in this movie, it seems that he is just playing the piano in this film. There is a certain small part of this film where Eric and Shelley are doing this like jam session where she's singing and he's going on and playing the piano, and it's probably not as fascinating as in the original film, but I guess it is what it is in that scene there. It's just kind of very like, why does this scene need to be here kind of thing. Uh, but then again, like when Shelley starts to go on and play the piano, there's a bunch of flashbacks that happen in her brain. So we have Vincent that is going on to be at this kind of fancy place. There's a bunch of people surrounding him. It's a whole gala or something. But the only real important thing to be had in this environment is just the fact that Vincent goes on and is meeting with a musician named Gray, I believe. And eventually Gray is going to go on and perform for Vincent. And really, I feel nothing is to come of this, but to just state that Vincent is to seem to really just have a thing for musicians, to the point of us coming on and understanding how Shelley was to have gone on and ended up with Vincent because she was also a musician in her own right too. So in some ways it just does kind of make sense, but like we never really understand what is to be the payout between both Gray and Vincent. But to maybe say that Gray it kind of becomes like an innocent with Vincent, and Gray is to probably start to realize more and more that Vincent is not exactly a savory guy. Maybe at some points, I don't know. If anything, we just have to have something get like some kind of payout between Gray and Vincent, if nothing else. So Vincent is to go on and be told by Marion that they have Zadie here and he needs to take care of her. So Vincent makes his way to Sadie and is to go on and kind of tell her, it's like, well, hey, yeah, like I know where you're going, kind of thing. Like basically saying, like, well, yeah, like he's there to go on and make certain innocent people go down. to hell. So we have Vincent that, of course, goes on and whispers sweet nothings into Sadie, and she ends up having her eyes roll in the back of her head, and then she goes on and she takes this knife and stabs it into herself, and then Vincent goes on and slices his hand and puts his hand on to Zadie's uh, wound, and like that is to be the whole like ending of this whole ceremonious thing. So now going back to Eric with his old jumping jacks thing and the guard being ticked at him because of a scene of I already said. So fast tracking that to where now both Eric and Shelly are having lunch together, even though the opposite sex should not go on and sit next to one another. But Shelly doesn't care. Eric doesn't give a because really Eric is going to get in trouble with this guard regardless of the rules of the law. So we have Shelly and we have Eric talking here. And so what really comes up between the two is the whole tattoo thing. The whole laugh now, cry later tattoo that Shelly has. Is if I said that backwards, regardless, I think uh, it doesn't really matter. Either way. So the tattoo ends up coming up, and so Eric is like, "Well, my life is more like cry now, cry later." Like, yeah, I'm so deep, but I'm so emo. But interestingly enough, Eric eventually later on gets a tattoo that says "Cry now, cry later" on his thing. But the tattoo doesn't end up getting finished until the very later part of the film, and he has to finish it himself because his tattoo artist is freaking dead. So the two of them are just kind of talking about themselves a little bit here and there. But then the guard ends up coming to break them up, and so that gives us all the hope in the world that eventually both Shelley and both Eric are going to continue to just meet up with one another. So this therapist goes on and ends up putting together this whole circle exercise that forces certain people to go on and take a step further into the circle, and it seems that the further and further Eric and Shelley go into the circle compared to everyone else, kind of goes on and kind of tells us a lot about them too. So we have Marion that goes on and she speaks to Shelley's mother. And that eventually has us go on to then realize that Marion is going to go on and get to Shelley at this Serenity Park. So back with Eric and Shelley getting to know more about one another, Shelley makes her way into Eric's room to come to find out that he is an artist. She ends up grabbing one of the pictures, like, oh, is this me? Ooh, yeah. Right. So Shelley then goes on and is to just start to thumb through a lot of Eric's stuff. And so this eventually goes on and has Shelley just kind of talk a little bit about herself. And so we then go on to have Marion, who is making her way through this facility, and the loudspeaker going on and stating that Shelley is to be needed at a certain place, and Shelley and Eric are to make their way out of that room to realize that Marion and all these guys are to be there. So like, oh crap, like yeah, like they're after me. They're coming to get me. So Eric and Shelly, it's like, well, hey, we need to make a break for it. We need to run out of here. We need to run away. And so Eric makes this plan to go into the laundry room, and he tells Shelly, it's like, well, hey, if you make it through these windows, you can make it onto this yard, and you can escape. And so since Eric himself has nothing going on with his life, he too decides to kind of cut uh his ankle monitor thing and runs off with Shelly, and they run off together. So by the time that Marion makes it to the laundry room, the two of them have already escaped. And the two of them are on the road uh, through this woods to get to this road where there is this truck here, and they both get to the back of this uh, uh, truck. So they go on, and so Eric is asking Shelly at the back of this truck. It's like, well, hey, like, what was that all about? And Shelly ends up saying something like, well, like, it's just a part of my dark past. And Eric's like, oh, I've had one of those. And so, like, they don't really, like, go in depth about themselves. So, the two of them make it off of this truck, and then they're just kind of strolling around in their pink get-ups all through town, and, like, nobody goes on and makes a word edgewise about it. So, come to find out, Shelly has this friend that she can just go on and easily go into his place and just live there for however long, because this guy seemingly never shows up, it seems. So, this quickly leads to, like, okay, since they now are to be alone together in this place that it seems that like the guy who's supposed to be there isn't exactly going to show up anytime soon. Here's when they quickly realize that they are uh, good for one another, and that they're going to kiss and eventually just sleep with one another, spend some time in a tub with one another, and uh, basically just have all kinds of fun with either drugs or finding this extra just uh, spot where there's like this little secret hole of cash, and eventually that leads Eric to find Shelly's secret hole later in this film. And so the two of them go on and they're trying clothes, and they play around with these sheets, and they're kissing in these sheets. It's very weird. It's very awkward. So we have this detective. The detective ends up going on to relay to Marion, and this, of course, to be if I could figure out where his freaking name is in this whole setup of things. Uh, do not know. I don't really care. So this detective goes on and he calls Marion, and he ends up telling her that the Zadie Bonnie has been found, and so like this cop is dirty and he's working for them. So really, they're probably gonna have to go on and figure out some way to like just kind of have this kind of just swept under the rug kind of thing. So this then forces Marion to uh call Vincent and kind of relay the news and this and that while he's kind of watching Gray play here. So all while that's going on, we have Eric and we have Shelly, and they're going on this little camp out with all these other random friends that they've gone on and met. Shelly's going on and reading this book called uh, Rimbayad, whatever goofy book that is. And eventually, later on, we have Eric that is going through Shelly's stuff and reconnects with that book name. So Eric and Shelly are going on and they're swimming together, they're having this good time. So that ends up then having them turn around and having this singing and keyboarding sesh between the two of them. And this then leads to Eric just having, at some points, like a stopping point of playing the piano and is trying to figure out how Shelly can go on and play the piano because she plays it better than he does. So Shelly is like, yeah, I don't want to go on and I don't really want to play the piano. And as soon as she does, all of a sudden, a lot of these flashes of her going on and being involved with Vincent in her past comes up and really making her forcibly realize that she had gone on to kill somebody in the past. But then we don't really come up with the video until much later in the video, or in the movie, I mean. So this turns around and has both Shelly and both Eric upon this bridge. I'm really fast tracking a lot through this movie because I just kind of want to get this review done. And also, I realize how probably not a lot of people are going to tune into this review compared to other things. So, my fast tracking is to just be the way it is so I can get this review done also. So, Eric, Shelly at this bridge, and so they're talking about how they're going to go on and jump off this bridge. As if this is almost to be quasi like how it is supposed to be some kind of like It's a Wonderful Life kind of moment, or maybe like The Mask with Jim Carrey, or at some point he was kind of tempted to just kind of jump off the bridge, but then he ended up seeing the mask in the water, and he is like, "Oh, I'll save you, sir," and then it ends up being that it's just the mask. So Shelly and Eric are talking about like, well, like if Shelly's to go on and jump off this bridge, would Eric follow after her? And there is to be the moment between the two of them where Shelly was to have told Eric, and this ends up getting kind of replayed later about the whole love thing, where Shelly eventually tells Eric, and it's not anywhere in this scene where, and I just remembered it now, where Shelly tells Eric, it's like, well, hey, like, if I'm hard to love, it's like figure out a harder way to love me. And she says it says it in some way like that, which also just tells us that these two characters, like, regardless of where eventually Eric's doubt goes, these two will end up being together, even if it means that one is to jump off a bridge, the other is to follow suit, just because of how, like, the two of them are going to be loyal to one another. Hence why I brought that whole thing up to tie into this one scene. So the two of them are going on and they're talking about that. So transition them to go into this nightclub. And they're going on, they're dancing, they're having a fun time, and all of a sudden Dorm comes in with his hoodie and he starts talking to Shelly, and Eric ends up going on to be like, well, hey, what's going on here? Because the two of them are kind of aggressively talking. And so this then leads both Eric and Shelly to now head back to their place for them to go on and hide out. So by the time they get there, we would then come to find that there are men grabbing Shelly and putting a bag over her head and killing her. and then doing the exact same thing to Eric. So this is seriously the way they go on and they kill these characters, just tossing a bag over their head, which I think is the stupidest way to kill somebody. But hey, that's the way that they just die in this film. It could have been any number of any other way that they could have just killed these people. There could have been a lot better way, but we went with this route. So we go on to have these two be killed, and so that leads to all of a sudden this it seems to be dream sequence where Eric is in the water, Shelly is in the water, and Shelly is going on and dropping, whereas Eric, it seems, is going to swim to the uh, the very surface of this water, to where it's just air at that point. So there's a whole symbolism between that. So because we come to find that Shelly is forced to go to hell, and she's to sink further and further into this water, whereas Eric is to go on and reach the surface because he's going to go on and have the possibility to go to heaven. So Eric gets out of the water and he starts making his way to this one location where he, of course, meets up with a guy named Kronos. And so Eric is to go on and to have thought that he was either like, what am I dreaming? Like, what is this? Like, and so Cronus ends up kind of setting up to him. It's like, well, hey, you're dead. Like, this is the afterlife, buddy. And so Eric is like, oh, are you some angel? Like, what are you? And so it's like, oh, well, yeah. So Kronos ends up going on and telling Eric, it's like, well, hey, like, it's not exactly your time. Like, it's not exactly your time to go on and go to the pearly gates just yet. Like, if anything, it's your time right now to go on and become a character that is ultimately to be called the Crow, because the Crow is to at some points go on and is to be a kind of vessel for revenge, and is to have that character just go on and be so strong that he can't just go on and like live an existence in the afterlife. He has to go on and like he says it in a very drastically different way in the film. I'm just going on and trying to figure out some way that I can say the same thing and help people possibly understand what I'm talking about with why this. So there is a very good reason why Eric should go on and not exist in this plane of existence. That he needs to go on and he needs to go on and get vengeance upon all the people that had gone on to kill him, for them to die and him to come back to then have him have the ability to have his final resting place after that. But also the way that this movie eventually gets to be done the way it does, Eric can't just so easily go and achieve that goal, because I guess he is to possibly the further into this movie, once he is to make the deals that he does, like he is just kind of stuck being the Crow seemingly forever, because eventually it gets to the point to where Eric and Shelly cannot go on and like have their final like meet together. So meaning that like Shelly can go on and go to heaven, but Eric can't meet her there. So anyways, so Eric is to go on and make his way back to his afterlife, and so he then is to be hiding away as the detective is going on and making his way into uh, this crime scene before anyone else does, because they had gone on and left behind a little bit of thing of evidence that the detective has to kind of collect here, which all of a sudden has him bump into Eric. And so the detective goes on and he's like, you know what, I can hear you, like I know you're there, so just kind of come out. And so they start to face off here, and Eric ends up getting shot. And so this leads us to have like a kind of like a roll of a fight and this and that, which eventually leads to, because of Eric going on and having the ability to heal and kind of grow back at some points, but whenever there is kind of bone breaking, uh, Eric literally has to push the bone back to where it's to be put back in place for everything to start to heal. So, but Eric goes on and he shoots and he kills this detective. So, and then he goes on and he tries to uh, show us how he's going on and healing all of these wounds. So, Eric is to go on and eventually be followed by the Crow here. And so we have Eric that is all of a sudden seeing Shelly. And Shelly goes on and she jumps off this bridge to drown to her death. And Eric, who of course realizes, oh my god, Shelly. So he jumps in after her, and that leads him right back to the afterlife where he's talking again to Kronos. So that goes on and just pushes Kronos to then again just push Eric back into the afterlife. And like it gets to the point to where Kronos is just like, man, like you have the power of the god, but you're a boy, and like you're just kind of making so many mistakes, and like you're not using this power right. And eventually you'll get to the point where he'll give him the black blood, and Eric will go on and be able to use the crow correctly to where he's killing all these folks. And then the eventual upswing will eventually commence of him going on and doing some more interesting things in this film. So Eric goes on and meets up with a guy named Chance, I believe. And Eric right now has to go on and kind of in a almost Spawn like way. Like, you know how in the live action Spawn movie, Spawn goes on and he's like, yeah, I need a bunch of guns. And then Spawn just has a bunch of guns where he goes and faces off against the big villain. And then he realizes that he needs to go on and be able to use all of his Spawn powers. Like, Crow doesn't really have much of any real, like, Spawn powers. He just ends up going from like, okay, like, hey, let me use this gun, to okay, now let me go on and use this sword and I'll kill everybody with this sword. And like I don't really need much of anything but this sword, because if anything, anyone's gonna go on and try and shoot into me. What good is that gonna do? All I need is just a weapon that doesn't run out of ammo, run out of bullets, which is clearly enough of just a sword having that. I can go on and just kill a bunch of people with that. So we have Eric that goes on and gets this gun from Chance. And so he then goes on to meet up with Shelly's mother. And so that leads to then uh, have him be in the car with Sophia, I believe, and is to tell this mother, it's like, well, hey, like I loved your daughter, and like I want to go on and I want to go after these guys. Like, who was a part of Shelly's death? Like, who are the names you can go on? You can tell me. And so this woman is going on and drinking this like this Bloody Mary, I believe, with the celery stick. And she goes on and she's just the normal grieving mother, and she drops the drink and she's like kind of weirdly picking it up. So doesn't really seem that we're going to go on and immediately get answers coming from this mother. And so Eric then goes on into Shelly's room and starts to pick through some things, and then goes on and finds a secret little this little air duct or air vent thing, and starts to get all these photos. So the Crow then goes on, the Crow and Eric eventually make their way to finding the first guy, which of course is Lex. And so Eric goes on and is to turn his gun on to Lex, and is to want to get all the information of who he is to be tied to, and gets into the back of this guy's car and is like, okay, you're gonna take me to these men, you're gonna take me and I'm gonna kill them all. Well, Lex goes on and he reaches for his gun, and so Eric is forced to kill him. So he's like, ah, fuck, like I just killed this guy. So, but bizarrely enough, Marion and like her bodyguard that she's with are walking out of this specific area. So that leads then Eric to go, aha. So Marion and this bodyguard and a bunch of these other guys are in this car. And so Eric turns his gun onto this car and starts firing away. So the car tries to ram him. And so I believe he crashes through the windshield. And then we start to have him go on and start to murder a number of these guys through this car. And this leads, I think, Marion's bodyguard that goes on and starts firing bullets into Eric, and then tosses him out of this car for him to get run down via this semi truck. And so Eric ends up getting up, and his leg is completely broken, and he has to kind of toss the bones back in, and he's like, "Wah!" So this ends up forcibly gets Vincent another update about what's going on here. And Vincent is in a car with Gray. And so Vincent ends up getting forced to meet up with Sophie, Shelly's mother. And so Vincent ends up telling Shelley's mother his condolences and this and that. But it also seems that there was a bargain struck between both Vincent and both Sophie here. That it seems that he was to give her all the riches in the world and whatever she wanted, but it would go on to cost her her child. So, more than likely, there was a whole bargain struck with all of these rich people and Vincent to go on and be able to get like whatever they wanted, but the whole problem is they had to give up one of their children, which ends up probably being every single one of those photos that Eric was to go on and collect. So I was like, oh, okay, all right. Like there is a kind of interesting, just kind of side story like thing that we're not completely aware of here. But I kind of liked that about this story. But so Sophie ends up telling Vincent that she's like, well, you know what, like I would go on and I would trade my life for my daughters if I had a chance. And Vincent is like, okay, well, like I can go on and I can do that too. Because Vincent goes on and he uses his ability on Sophie, and Sophie ends up having her eyes roll back into her head. And by the time that Vincent makes his way back down uh, to get back to his car, we all of a sudden see Sophie fall to her death and die here. So he ended up using his ability on her to just have her end her own life. So then Vincent ends up going on and talking to Marion on the phone. So here's where we have Eric that goes on and he speaks to Dorm, and Dorm ends up informing Eric about the whole Vincent rogue thing and all these guys that Eric is probably going to have to go on and kill. So, kind of giving him the most information out of possibly everybody. So, and then the possible like whole video thing that he ends up going on and seeing, and that ends up giving Eric a lot of doubt about Shelley because he didn't 100% know everything about her, even her dark side, which of course is to be this video where she goes on and kills somebody, but it's because she's forced to because of Vincent. So, but Eric goes back to the place of where her or him and Shelley were in the past, and he goes on and finds the coat that she put onto him, and so he trades the coat that he has on now for that coat, which ends up being his signature coat for this movie. And he goes on and he has to kind of thrust his hand with these curtains that they'd kind of shared this moment between one another with these curtains and so on and so forth. And so the video ends up playing. We end up getting to see what happened with Vincent, with Zadie, with Shelley, the murdering, all of that happening, so on and so forth. So we then go on and we have Eric and Chance, and they're together. And this is all because Eric wants to go on and get his tattoo of the cry now, cry later thing. And so this leads to have Wickham and this kind of more bald guy go on and seek out Eric. And this leads, of course, for Chance to get shot in the head and shot right in the eye, and he dies. And so we also have Eric that needs to face off against these guys, but he ends up getting outnumbered. he ends up getting shot in the chest, and he ends up falling into this tub, and it seems that he ends up drowning, and then he wakes back up in the kind of afterlife, or whatever this is, whatever this oasis is. And here's where here's the thing where now Kronos is telling Eric about the whole, like, man, you have the power of the god, but you're just a boy. And here is where we forcibly have to go on and have now Eric making a bargain with Kronos about how, like, well, hey, how about I trade my soul for Shelley's, and how about I just kind of make a bargain to make sure I have the pure power of this crow to go up against all these guys and be sure that I can go on and defeat all of them. And so Cronus is like, oh, okay, all right, well. So they end up putting this ceremony together about this black blood, and there is a whole, like, cutting of the hands, and they're holding hands together, and so they're going to go on and share the same blood. And so now Eric is going on and he's crying all this blackness. This black blood is all just coming from his eyes, very biblical and this and that. So we have Cronus that goes on and is to tell Eric here that, like, the black blood is to just be kind of the symbol, the thing that is to, like, showcase, like, who he is in this afterlife and this and that. So Eric then comes back and he looks like Eric. He doesn't still have the black makeup, and so he ends up going on to get up from out of this tub, and he immediately ends up firing a shotgun into the bald guy, and then he goes after Wickham, and he kills him also. And so this goes on to then have Eric, shortly after that, to go on and seek out this cell phone, and they end up talking about how they're going to the opera in 2 hours. So Eric knows where exactly they're going. So Eric goes on to take the time to finish up his tattoo where it finally says "Cry Later," and then he ends up putting on the black ink upon his face, and is to need to go on and look at himself in the mirror with the sword and just be trying to look like a badass. But logically, this whole scene just kind of is like, okay, this is like the weirdest scene of this whole thing. Like, why is he looking at himself in the mirror? Why does this matter? Why does this kind of weird vanity scene that he's kind of just doing? Why is he doing this? This is almost kind of as weird as Joker doing the dance in the Joker film. But I guess you also have to have it in every single superhero thing. There's always about these moments where guys are probably, like, psyching themselves up, or like, hey, look how cool I am. And I have to look in the mirror and just be like, yeah, look at me now. Like, I have to prepare, like, ahead of time for all the cool poses I'm eventually going to go on and do. Yeah. So we go on to have Marion, and so she's going on and she's making her way to this opera. Vincent is at the opera. The Crow is making his way to the opera. Like, man, if they would have gone on and had kind of certain, like, references to Phantom of the Opera with the Crow, that would have been fun, but they didn't go in that route. So Vincent goes on and he calls Marion, and he goes on and he tells her, it's like, well, yeah, like, I'm sorry, but you're gonna be the one that kind of falls right now. Like, that's just the way things are just kind of built up here. That you're gonna have to go on and be the person that dies by the sword here, because literally there's gonna be a guy coming in to sword up people, and you're gonna be the last one of those. So so Marion's guard goes on, and so bleh. Marion's guard ends up going on and calling Stefan, and is kind of getting a check of like, well, hey, how is everything going? This and that. And so the Crow ends up making his way into meeting up with these guards, and he ends up going on, and the first guard he sees, he stabs one in the back of the head going through the mouth with this sword. It was pretty good visual. And then we have this next guard, and so now we have the Crow, so I'm just going to call Eric the Crow from now on because he has the makeup. When he's not having the makeup, he's not the Crow, but now he's the legit Crow. So the Crow goes on, and he like chops into the other guard. We then go on and consistently just have a lot of times where the Crow is just either just kind of chopping off people's heads or stabbing into them. It's a lot of that going on here. There's just a lot of guards that he's just having to make his way through. There's at one point where he takes the blade and he pushes it through the person's mouth to further just kind of kill this person in a very horrific way. But man, was that actually a pretty cool visual, even though it also was probably gross to a lot of people, whatever. There also is quite a bit of times uh, where Crow is going on and grabbing a gun from somebody and kind of firing off while he's trying to still kill that one person. And oh well, also this opera is consistently kind of flashing and doing these scenes and going on, whichever. It is kind of funny to go on and do like this opera thing because I was kind of reminded of like Batman Begins where we have an opera in there, but like this movie is nowhere as near as good as freaking Batman Begins. But anyways, if it's not as good as the two other Crow movies, how could it go on and be as good as Batman Begins? But anyways, so there also is a point where the Crow goes on and takes a guy's neck and snaps it while like kind of crushing him into the steps, and I was like, oh my god, all right, cool. So one guy ends up getting like kind of chucked through this window. A lot of stuff ends up happening here. A lot of people end up dead. And so I think a lot of this stuff is kind of straight up has kind of already been for the most point done here. So I'm just gonna get to the meat and the potatoes here. Uh the Crow ends up going on and like has his chest be stabbed with a sword. So he stabs into somebody else while he falls backwards to have them get stabbed by that same sword. And then the Crow pulls the sword out, which I thought was kind of cool. Kind of reminded me of the the Wolverine movie, or just kind of a lot of those times where you go on and you have a person that can kind of heal from anything. And so they kind of have this sword in them, and so they always kind of use the sword and they play around with it. So everybody's dying with these swords. It's freaking awesome. So the Crow goes on and meets up with Marion's lead guard, and the lead guard is like, okay, come on, bring it, buddy, because I know I'm gonna die here. Because he ends up firing into the Crow, and nothing's going to go on. So he's just like, okay, well, like, go on and try your best, and he chops off the guy's head. And so Eric makes his way to Marion, and he doesn't kill her so quick. Like, the two of them want to go on and like, hey, let's have a little chat here, so I can get to know like who the final boss is before I go on and I kill you. So Marion is going on and giving Eric a little bit of more knowledge of Vincent and who he's dealing with, and then goes on, chops off her head, and then goes into the opera and shows the whole audience these two heads, and all of them start to leave. And we had Marion that goes on, and she had looked at Eric and said, it's like, well, hey, like, both you and Vincent are kind of the same, that neither one of you like likes who you are, or like a lot of you have like kind of bad within you, but at least Vincent is better at hiding it than you are. And I thought that whole thing of what Marion was to say was just kind of interesting. Uh, but it's also just kind of set up that they're kind of like both Vincent and the Crow are kind of equally matched here. And so, again, Eric is holding up these two heads as everybody starts leaving the opera, but the only person that is still at their seat is Shelley, and is looking at Eric, and Eric is just like, oh, well, ugh. Well, Eric is to go on and is to remember what the two of them had gone on and talked about the whole bridge thing. And so Eric is to find the one uh, bouquet of flowers that Shelley had said that she wanted at this bridge, and he got those for her, and he put the flowers by the bridge, and then he left to go and face off against Vincent. So Vincent is going on, and he's combing his hair, getting ready for his bout. Yeah, I gotta go on and just gotta make sure my hair is just right for this death that I'm probably gonna have. So the Crow goes on and is to be behind Vincent, and is to have this sword to his neck. And Vincent isn't scared of this. Vincent is like, okay, all right, well, hey, like, if you're gonna kill me, go ahead and do it. Like, I don't care. I don't give a shit. Because Vincent knows that he also has his own kind of little blade that he has, and he stabs it right into Eric's chest, and then he goes on and is to like stab into his own hand and touch Eric and do that whole thing that he does to everybody and whisper sweet nothings into Eric's ear, like he goes on and does to everybody. And Norm had even gone on to tell Eric about the whole, like, well, yeah, like, Vincent goes on and he whispers something into everybody that just turns them just so evil and makes them do the worst things that they could probably ever do. And regardless of it just being unlike them, it's just like it just drives them mad to the point of them just doing the most evilest things. So Eric is going on and having his eyes roll into the back of his head. And so we all of a sudden have the black blood that is coursing through now both Eric and both Vincent, as now Vincent is going on and he's crying black tears. So the both of them are the Crow now, it seems. The both of them are to be forced to go into the afterlife because the both of them are going to eventually seemingly be dead here. And so now the two of them are going on and they're to both to be thrusted into the afterlife. And the two of them are going on and they're to now have this like final like what we're thinking fight in the afterlife. But what really just happens is that the Crow ends up forcing Vincent down into hell. Like he goes on and he pushes him down, and all of these monstrous things just start to grab onto him, and it was like, okay, we know where he's going. And so we then turn around and have Shelly, because Eric has fought all the people he is needed to fight, and Shelly is making her way back up to Eric, and they have this hug between one another, and they kiss, and then all of a sudden we find that Shelly is now being revived, and so now she is back to full health, and she's looking at Eric, and Eric is dead. And the Kronos character is now a ambulance uh, person who is going on and talking to Shelly, and so Shelly ends up going on to become this musician, this artist, realizing that she now has to kind of live her life, as well as also uh, the Crow has to go on and continue fighting vengeance, and having the Crow behind him to walk off into the afterlife like sunset and finish up this film. And yeah, I'm gonna call it there. Really, I really rushed through this one. I really rushed through this movie. I didn't go into much details, or I didn't want to go on and fully talk about this dialogue. But man, there actually at some points is some good beats and good dialogue that I didn't even go into. Uh, Hence why me going on and saying to just kind of give this movie a chance. I know this movie is not what probably everybody was hoping for, another Crow film, but logically, I think also there's a lot of people on the fence with this film. There are certain people that are talking about this movie, and some of them are talking about it in a positive light. Not all of it is to go on to be negative. And I want to say that I would state that this movie may have had some potential for maybe somewhere down the road a much more interesting Crow. Uh, but also, like, this movie was also to just be so freaking slow. Uh, we needed more action scenes, and I think obviously, we also had Skarsgård, who went on to do like the action movie uh, Boy Kills World, and really, I think for that film, there was so much action in that movie, and there was none story. So I'm sure probably Skarsgård didn't want to turn around and do yet another filled of action film, but he probably did that movie just to showcase that he can do that kind of film. To then maybe have a studio maybe realize like, oh hey, yeah, like I do realize that the very first Crow movie that we did was very slow, but now when we go on and do a Crow movie that's gonna probably just do well enough, if we do a sequel, if we just get enough money to scrape together just to do a sequel, then we'll give everybody what they want, and we'll also uh, go on and we'll give a more action-packed Crow film. But then again, there's also a lot of people that are going on and saying that this is some kind of corporate goth character, and it isn't to be the right version of the Crow that we are supposed to have. Here is how I just state this. Again, uh, this Crow is actually very similar to the Crow Salvation Crow. And also, if you were to go on and realize that the Crow, with the same look that it's had for a number of years, is to really been a thing that has gone into more and more obscure films and this and that, where people have not gone on and really had or held much importance of the Crow. Like, even look at his comic books, where the comic books had a good, like, a kind of early run, and then like is going on and having like the Crow do very much more weird and maybe raunchy and sexual weird looking things. Like I think there's certain Crow comic books where like the Crow is like shirtless, and it's very strange looking, it's very weird looking. So doing this image of how the Crow looks had to be just so wildly different enough to then maybe force the real Crow fans to come out of the woodwork and just be like, hey, we wanted the Crow traditionally how he looks and this and that. Just to be like, well, okay, then. Like, we now can now see that there are a lot of people who like the traditional look of the Crow, and we're going to turn around and give you that film because we just wanted to kind of test the waters to see if people are going to like a different kind of look of the Crow, a different kind of direction. But no, everybody wants the Crow the way he was. And it's like, okay, now that we know that, and we put this movie out there to strike that chord, now we're going to go on and do another Crow movie at some point, probably not in the current current time, I'm sure, and give you the Crow that you actually wanted. Maybe a Jason Momoa Crow, because it seems that Jason Momoa had wanted to go on and do a Crow film, but he was realizing, yeah, like it probably won't be anytime soon. It probably won't be this year, but it probably will be X number a year. And so yeah, for those of you who were psyched about that whole Jason Momoa Crow movie, will probably get that. Because I logically do not think that this movie is going to build up a franchise of movies. I could be shocked and surprised that it does go on and do enough to justify that. But then again, also, people are not going to want to continue to go back to this Crow. They just won't. Unless it's going to be such a fast tracked, straight to streaming release that people still will probably just like, I guess since there's nothing else on, I'll watch this. Uh, but yeah, there are way too many diehard Crow fans to just go on and and just watch this film just because there's no other Crow content. There's too much of it. There's a show. There's 4 films. They can sit on those as much as they want to and just be uh, a non watcher of this newer stuff because they can pick and choose which Crow they want to go on and support. Whether it's the normal original Crow or the City of Angel Crow, the Crow Salvation Crow, or the Stairway to Heaven Crow. There's too many freaking Crows out there, and now you have this goofy one that a lot of people will just go on and laugh and make fun of, and then have us get a more traditional Crow movie later down the road, and have us just be laughing again at this one Crow movie when everybody forgets that Crow Salvation was a movie that existed also that looks just like this one. And like it's all just to be an experiment. It's all just to be a polling or questioning of what people's tastes are really going to be for the Crow nowadays. Or also, they're probably just going on and thinking that people are probably just going to go on and check out this movie regardless of how everybody is seriously hating it. And also, with everybody going on and talking about this movie, whether it be positive or negative, that's still advertisement of this movie. That is still just free press that these people are realizing they're getting for this film. And as well as also like people are going on and making fun of the fact that these people are going on and promoting this movie in a very goofy or weird way, like the ASMR thing. I'm sure, seriously, these actors could not give a rip about how they're going on and doing things to promote this movie. They're just wanting to go on and say, like, man, we're cashing all these checks for all these different goofy things that we're having to frickin' do, as well as also to have already gone on and cashed the check for this movie, because, man, it's good that that check cleared. Because Bills, or whatever, Skarsgård can go on and do a number of other frickin' projects then I'm sure he will probably quickly have forgotten that this one even existed in his freaking greatest hits of movies that he's ever gone on and done. Because I'm sure he's going to go on and do a number of other roles. And this isn't going to affect his career going forward. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.